To help us understand the religious, diplomatic, and geopolitical significance of Pope Leo's visit to Lebanon and Turkey, we're joined by two exceptional expert voices. Frank Rocca is EWTN News' senior Vatican analyst. He has covered the Vatican for nearly 20 years. Alberto Fernandez is an EWTN News contributor and a former U.S. diplomat. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. Frank, I want to start with you. What is something new we learned about Leo's leadership style from his first apostolic journey?
Well, I think we saw what we've been seeing for the few months that he's been Pope and now on a world stage, which is the exceptional confidence and self-assurance that he shows in this job, which very few people expected him to have only a short time ago. And very low key, very calm, very serene. I thought there was an interesting moment when he went into the Blue Mosque and the Muezzin invited him to pray, and he just said, "No, that's okay. I'm just going to look around." Again, it was a very delicate point that was very controversial with Pope Benedict and then with Pope Francis, and he handled it very matter-of-factly, offhandedly, and no repercussions, no tensions.
Right. And we'll get to that mosque moment a little bit later in the discussion. But Alberto, first, the National Catholic Register published your latest commentary this week titled Pope Leo's First Apostolic Journey Delivered Real-World Results. Alberto, what are those results?
Well, the biggest one was in Lebanon, where he spoke very forcefully and realistically about peace. In fact, Lebanese commentators said that he spoke much more realistically than the Lebanese politicians about it. And once the Pope left, the Lebanese government announced that it would, for the first time in 34 years, send a civilian diplomat to meet with Israelis in the ceasefire talks. This happened shortly after the Pope's visit, and then the Lebanese government announced that there will be a second session of that. That's a very tangible thing that happened immediately after the Pope's visit and very much in sync with the language that he used.
Right. Very consequential. Frank, during a wide-ranging in-flight press conference on the way back to Rome, Pope Leo weighed in on a number of diplomatic matters, including U.S. matters, one being that he urged against a U.S. incursion of Venezuela. Let's take a listen.
It seems there is the possibility that there be some activity, even in operation, to invade Venezuelan territory. I truly believe that it is better to look for ways of dialogue, maybe pressure, including economic pressure, but looking another way to change, if that is what they want to do in the United States.
Frank, are we seeing Pope Leo, our first U.S.-born Pope, becoming more vocal on U.S. political matters? What did you make of his comments on the plane and how we're seeing him engage with the Trump administration right now?
Well, it's funny, yeah, because when he was elected, being especially because he's an American, the expectation in many quarters was that he would be, in a sense, this foremost critic of the Trump administration on many things. And of course, Pope Francis had been very critical of the Trump administration on things right up almost to the end. And Pope Leo has made it clear how he feels, for example, on the migration question. There was a little bit of a hiccup there. In fact, he gives these press gaggles outside of Castel Gandolfo occasionally. And it was actually a question from EWTN when we asked him about U.S. politics. And after that, he seemed to back away. The following week, he was asked about immigration raids. And he said, I don't want to comment on U.S. politics. But then a week or two later, he started it again. So we seem to be seeing him develop his communication strategy in real time. And he seems to have found his footing and decided that, yes, he is going to weigh on these important issues when he thinks so. And again, I think he seems to be showing a knack for doing this in a kind of way that doesn't make things explosive. It doesn't increase the tension. It kind of calms things down a bit. So he manages to say these things without creating a firestorm.
That's a difficult thing to do. Alberto, Pope Leo, as we mentioned, visited Istanbul's Blue Mosque. And while he did take his shoes off, he did not stop to pray, as his predecessors, Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis, had done. An imam of the mosque says he did invite the Pope to pray, but he declined. What do you read into that moment and the message and repercussions that it carries?
Well, I think it was absolutely right what he did, and I think he walked a fine line successfully, which was he showed true respect for his hosts. He showed true respect, deep respect for Islam, something which he has said many times, and in fact continues to say so. But there was no pandering. There was no hint of kind of false equivalence. We're all the same. Everything's the same. I respect you. I don't respect myself. There was respect for Islam and self-respect, which I think is a very powerful message in the region.
Absolutely. Frank, we did hear Pope Leo speak an increasing amount of English, it seems, particularly with members of the media on this trip. As a longtime Vatican journalist, how significant is this? And being that English is not only his native language, but it is one of the most accessible languages, what do you think the Pope's strategy is about when to and when not to use English?
Right. Well, okay. In an international context here, he was never going to speak Turkish because he doesn't have, I don't think, as far as we know, he speaks that language. When Pope Benedict XVI went to Turkey in 2006, he spoke in French and in English. French was once considered the international language, and so that's appropriate. I think when Pope Leo, at the beginning of his pontificate, seemed to be using English sparingly in some international for speaking to some international audiences, but sometimes he seems concerned to be acting as the Bishop of Rome. For example, at World Youth Day, even though he had a very international audience, he only spoke a few lines of English. It was mostly Italian and Spanish. But I think in an international context like this, and I think you mentioned, and so he seems to be increasing the use of English, and I think you mentioned that he spoke to the press, and that to me was very significant because heretofore the unofficial language of the Vatican press corps has been Italian, and so Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, for example, who's not a native Italian speaker, would address the press on the plane in Italian. It was just understood. And so this is a big shift, and now he's speaking to them in English, which makes more sense because that's the language of international media.
Right. Alberto, final moment with you. We have less than a minute, but from a diplomacy perspective, what was the most significant moment that you extracted from this trip, whether it was a speech or a gesture?
Well, I've already mentioned the peace talk, but in addition to that, I would highlight one that I think was very moving to audiences, certainly in Lebanon, was his reaching out to the victims and survivors and family members of the Beirut port bomb blast 5 years ago. A terrible tragedy that has never been fully explained. No one's been punished for it. There's been zero accountability. And his real honest compassion with the family members, I think, moved a lot of Lebanese and also reminded them of the need for justice, not just for peace.
Absolutely. Thank you for highlighting that. Frank and Alberto, thank you so much.
Thank you.